Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us this morning for a session that's being hosted by the FEA to help members in response to addressing the compliance needs of UKCA. We know from many of you that this is a key issue, and despite the fact that the deadline has been extended on this now 4 times, I think, Martin, there is still the essential legal requirement to meet the compliance requirements of UKCA. Delighted to introduce to you in a second Martin Kay, who is the FEA technical consultant responsible for machinery. His role is within the UK Standards Committee and the relating to machinery and the UK designated standards that meet the requirements. Martin's got extensive international knowledge as well in terms of the standards making process and obligations, and indeed regularly contributes the FEA positions within those committees. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us this morning. Martin, if I may, I'll hand over to you to take us through the presentation. And what I will say is, if you have any questions as Martin's going through, please either post them in the chat, or we'll have an open mic session at the end of Martin's presentation for you to be able to put your questions directly to him. So Martin, if I may, over to you.
Okay, Keith, thanks very much. So I won't dwell on the, Keith has introduced me very well, but I have a background in the food industry, not catering, but United Biscuits, coffee companies, etc. But for the last 30 odd years, I've been involved with writing European standards for food processing machines and packaging machines. So let's start with politics. I'm sure you've all followed this, but I mean, just to be sure that everybody knows what's happening. Obviously, we were in the EU, which is part of the European Free Trade Area, the European Economic Area, EEA, which also includes 4 other countries, a 5th just been added. So Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Switzerland were in it before, but now Northern Ireland has joined them, and collectively they are the EEA, the European Economic Area, which is the recognised free movement of goods zone. Now, I'm sure you followed it all, but I mean, what happened as far as Great Britain is concerned, so England, Scotland, Wales, is that we decided not to do that. And now we are in a sort of different club with other countries, including Canada, Japan, Singapore, and Turkey, who have a different relationship with the European Economic Area. And that's really where all of this is coming from. And so we need to be thinking in terms of Northern Ireland, it's one thing, Great Britain, it's something else. And there's a picture I found on the internet, I mean, which kind of sums it up reasonably well, I think, but we've got this much argued about border post, as it were, down the Irish Sea. And so in Great Britain, we're outside the European Free Trade Area, outside the EU, whereas Northern Ireland is inside the European Economic Area, but outside the European Union. So the question comes is, what have you got to do to supply equipment in Great Britain? And the good news is that actually the legislation in terms of technically what is it asked for has not changed. So the basic legislation which affects food service equipment, so these 3 bits of legislation you may not be familiar with, but if I tell you low voltage directive, EMC directive, machinery directive, you'll perhaps immediately recognize them. But we've had the UK implementing legislation ever since they were introduced, right back in the 1990s. And it is essentially identical to the directive. So technically, there haven't been changes. And the other good news bit, as far as this is concerned, is the UK government has not got plans to change this legislation at the moment. So we are currently completely aligned with those directives. So just looking at one in particular, supply of machinery safety regulations, implementation of the Machinery Directive. As I say, we've had that for a long time. And all that's happened to that is that now there are new requirements as far as marking of equipment is concerned, how the Declaration of Conformity has got to be constructed, where the technical file has got to be sent, and who's got to deliver it. So those are where the changes have been made. So the date that we need to be thinking of in terms of the UKCA mark up to the 31st of December of this year, you are free to sell machines with CE marks in Great Britain. But from the 1st of January, then it should be the UKCA mark. That is going to be the requirement. Both of those marks can be simultaneously on the same product. That doesn't create any issues, certainly at the moment. But we'll talk about what may happen in the future and as I get towards the end of the presentation. So I've already started to see this on electrical products. Both a CE mark, a UKCA mark is probably the way that I think most people will be going. Certainly in the long term, maybe the short term, separate marking, but that ultimately it is not a confusion, and you may have seen on some products which have come from North America that you'll see the Canadian mark, you also see the UL mark, as well as a CE mark. So having different marks on the same product is something which can be done. Now, one of the questions which has been quite difficult to get an answer from out of the British government is the question of sub-assemblies. So a more complex pieces of equipment, which are, let's say they're made in Italy, it is likely that the equipment will have contactors, timers, etc., which have got CE marks on them. Electric motors the same, and UK government has confirmed that that is okay, provided there is a main plate which has got the UKCA mark on. So not every sub-assembly has got to have a UKCA mark. So we have the situation about stock. The way it's worded, I'm not entirely sure what they mean by placed on the GB market, whether that means that it's in a store ready to be sold, but hasn't been sold, that there's likely, I suspect, in 2023 going to be some stock which is still being sold. But I think this phrasing here basically means that provided it's in the UK with a CE mark before the 31st of December, then it has been placed on the market. So if we look at the Declaration of Conformity, now, unlike the naming plate, where we can have a UKCA and a CE mark on it, I don't think it's really possible to have a Declaration of Conformity which is simultaneously to an EU Declaration of Conformity and a UK one. So I think you're going to need to have a separate document because the UK Declaration of Conformity has got to refer to the UK legislation, so the UK regulations, not directives. It's got to apply to British standards, not EN. I mean, from a standard maker's point of view, they are completely identical. The English version of EN ISO 12100 is BSEN ISO 12100, but by the UK government. But perhaps most important on the Declaration of Conformity from a customer's point of view is that there needs to be a UK address for where the technical file is going to be obtained from. Because if not, there is a risk that the customer will be seen to be the importer. We'll come back and talk about that again. So this will typically either be a UK manufacturer, in which case, it's the one address, or it's the UK importer, maybe an agent, maybe a distributor. But as I say, this is because HSE trading standards officers no longer have a possibility of bringing a prosecution on European companies. So these are, I'm guessing, these are the regulations, the directives that you normally deal with. These are the directives. These are their UK equivalent. I don't know if any of you deal with other bits of legislation, but if you go to the .gov.uk website, you can see the other equivalents. And this is what a UK Declaration of Conformity might look like. I've written it for a packing machine, so please ignore that. But you're declaring conformity to the regulations, the UK regulations. In this case, there's 3 of them. We've listed some British standards which are relevant to this machine, and there is a UK address for the person who will be producing the technical file. As I say, I've touched on this before, that this is the reason for this is that at Brexit, trading standards officers and the health and safety executive lost the ability to bring a prosecution on a European company. And that means, if there isn't an obvious importer, they will actually prosecute the customer, and therefore that is, they'll go to the importer. They will not they go to the customer. So in terms of an exporter to Great Britain, really the role here, I think, may be that you've got to recognise the fact that you will need to have a UK representative. And as I was discussing with Keith just a moment ago, we're kind of going back to how it used to be in the 1990s, the early 1990s, where every overseas manufacturer would have a UK company who represented them in the UK market. And it's only really been for the last few years, the last 30 years, that we've been allowed to have something different. So appointing a representative, if there isn't an obvious one, like an agent or a distributor or a subsidiary company or something like that, may be what's going to be required. And the name and address of that organisation, that UK-based organisation, needs to be on that UK Declaration of Conformity. Now, in terms of the technical file, the requirement for the technical file, as far as the UK is concerned, is that a GB importer must ensure that the technical file is available and that can be produced. It doesn't have to be in Great Britain, but it does have to be in English, and it does have to be produced by someone who's based in the UK. Now let's look at the situation in Northern Ireland. So Northern Ireland, as we've heard on the news, and I'm sure you know, is a different case. Northern Ireland is sort of kind of in and out simultaneously. And what they have, as far as Northern Ireland is concerned, is that they will continue to accept the CE mark. They will continue to, and they will be accepting the UKCA mark. And for goods which are manufactured in Northern Ireland, they have a simultaneous thing of the NICA, the NI UK mark and the CE mark simultaneously on a product. Okay, so let's look the other way around, because this has also changed simultaneously. If you're a UK manufacturer, the situation has now changed as far as exporting to the EU, because precisely for the same reason that the technical file has got to be available in the UK from someone who's based in the UK, the same is true if you're exporting to the European Union. So if you're exporting to the European Economic Area, then the name and address of the person recorded under the EU Declaration of Conformity has got to be someone who is based in the European Economic Area. And for this, I've heard of some UK companies that have been sort of setting up Northern Ireland offices or addresses in Brussels or somewhere like that. So there are ways around it to overcome the problem, but the fundamental point is that you may have been exporting to France and only got a UK address on your declarations of conformity, but in future there have got to be two. There's got to be a European address as well for the technical file. Okay, so let's look at the standards which support the legislation. And this is the area, as Keith was saying, which I've been very much involved with. The UK has decided that all of a sudden that it is quite enthusiastic about standards in a way that prior to Brexit, it didn't seem to be quite so interested. And you'll be no doubt familiar with the concept of an EU harmonised standard. And the UK has decided that it will have an equivalent, which it calls a designated standard. So a designated standard is one that the UK government which is the Office for Product Safety and Standards has decided that it thinks is okay. Certainly the evidence up to now seems to suggest that it's they basically look at the list of harmonised standards, copy them unless there's a reason not to. That seems to be the way it's been working. And so the very first list, this was it, January of last year, looks, when you read it, almost identical to the harmonised standard. The latest such list is dated 21st of September last year. So this was the packaging machinery one, but the one that I think is perhaps more relevant to you guys. So here we've got the two standards, which are for dough mixers and planetary mixers. Which will be relevant to your industry. And the thing which is interesting from my point of view anyway, is that the UK government has now given them a statutory instrument number. So they've been recognised that they have a legal status, which is helpful, I think. And this is when, these are the dates when they've been accepted. And there can be, on some standards, there can be restrictions on the use of that standard, which are included in this list. Now, again, looking at what each of the UK government is as far as designated standards, they've written this hierarchy of where they would like a designated standard to come from. And top of the hierarchy are the international standards, so IEC or ISO, then BSI, bottom of the hierarchy, European standards, so SEN, CENELEC, etc. In practice, of course, and particularly in your area, I think still a large number of the standards are SEN standards or CENELEC standards. But that doesn't mean that there is a move to having BSI standards only. So, as I say, the designation process is a little bit opaque. I'm not quite sure how it's working But we have recently in the UK Shadow Committee, we've been asked to interface with the Office of Product Safety and Standards. Will we recommend a particular standard which has just been published by SEN for designation? So that process has begun to start, which I think is certainly from a standards maker's point of view is now, in terms of where are standards being produced, back in the 1990s when this whole process started, my involvement was with food processing machines and packaging machinery, and I started working on food packaging machinery in the 1989 actually, but I think it was 1993 for food processing machines. So I'm just going to confine my comments to what's happening there. So a lot of work done in the 1990s and the 2000s at a European level. And that has morphed in the last 10 years into much more work being done at an ISO level as well. So it's not substituting at the moment the work that's being done at a European level, but it is slowly picking up. And in terms of food machinery standards, slower than packaging machinery standards, but a fairly slow process. So those two streams are going to carry on for some time. That there will be a need for European standards as well as ISO standards for some time to come. It's not happening rapidly. There are very few places where there is a case for BSI standards, and I don't think your area is one of them. I know that that British standards are being written in particular areas. One of them is vacuum cleaners. You may remember how James Dyson got very upset about the European standard on vacuum cleaners. And so I think there's work on that. But there's also work carrying on in terms of fire safety because of Grenfell Tower and other areas where there's a particular UK interest. But generally speaking, I think the expectation is that standards will be written at either an ISO level or a European level. Now tell me, do any of the products that you guys deal with, are any of them, do they have to be approved, type approved by notified or approved bodies? Does anybody know? Yeah,
the gas appliances, Martin.
Right, okay.
Mandatory third-party testing on gas.
All right, so the UK approved bodies will be relevant for that. And what's happened again is that the UK's borrowed the idea of notified bodies. They've called them approved bodies. All the UK notified bodies have been appointed as approved bodies with the same number, actually, as I understand it. So it should be relatively easy, I think, for you. And as I understand it, most of the notified bodies are simultaneously approved bodies now as well. And to achieve that, they've got to have, so if just UK based, you can only be an approved body. But if you are a testing organization, which has also got a European base, then you can do both. Now, here's a point which I don't know if you've picked up on, quite possibly you already have, but one of the effects of Brexit is that there are restrictions on service engineers and other people coming into the UK, and the limitation is for 1 month without the need for a visa. Now, I'm guessing that for the majority of your products, that, you know, a month would be plenty, but you know, the kind of projects I used to be involved with, which might go on for several months, it would be a problem. The other thing that is going to be important is that at the border, a service engineer may be asked to prove that they've got, they can pay for their hotel, etc. Because so that right for free entry has disappeared. And I've done this in the past, going to other countries abroad, and basically all you need really is a letter from whoever the customer is to say that you've been invited because you're an expert, that you're not going to be a burden on the state, etc., which is one of the things that may arise. Now, the last thing that I wanted to talk about was the fact that there are going to be changes to the Machinery Directive. Now, the Machinery Directive, this has been happening with other bits of legislation, including legislation on food contact parts, but they've been turned from directives to regulations. So I guess you've seen this before. But the work is proceeding at the moment on the Machinery Directive to turn it into a regulation. Sorry about this. The original brief, as it were, the original idea was that this would be basically only work in certain areas, and the three areas which were originally identified would be artificial intelligence being applied to equipment, collaborative robots, and cybersecurity. Those were felt to be three areas where there was new technology and the existing Machinery Directive didn't have essential safety requirements which were relevant to those three aspects. We now have clauses which have been written on artificial intelligence, on collaborative robots, on cybersecurity. And Keith, I don't know what you think about them, but they certainly show that they're missing people who speak English as their first language, would be my comment. They're quite difficult to understand. And in the discussions, they spend a great deal of time even trying to define what artificial intelligence is. So there are issues there. I mean, for food service equipment, is artificial intelligence likely to be something that's going to be introduced?
Not in the immediate future, I think, Martin. I think it's got a way to evolve before we really start linking front of house ordering systems in food service to back of house equipment. I think we've got a fair way to go on that, but we are on the journey in other areas of connectivity and using data from appliances in a constructive and additive manner. Yeah.
What about collaborative robots? So I'm sort of picturing that in kitchens you might have a robot that stirs a pot or something like that. Is that a thing?
Not a huge amount of evidence of it at the moment.
Okay, so
the industry there are items of activity coming through, but tending not to be in the same way that robotics are used in factories, for example.
Right.
They haven't really found their true home and presence within the food service operator market.
Okay. Right. Cybersecurity was one that is begun to be a problem in certain industries, particularly over COVID. Actually, the potential for it, where with complex machinery, that the service engineer is in Italy and they're looking at the software for a machine in Northampton, let's say, and they are able to look at the software, see maybe what the problem is, and even change the software. I mean, is that something which is coming in at the moment?
Cybersecurity is a major problem for everybody. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So that would be the big area. Yeah. Yes. I mean, and I was hearing, I did a course on the provision and use of work equipment regulations the other day for Greggs, and they were saying that they, on their coffee machines, that the manufacturer of the coffee machines automatically changes the menu on the coffee machines remotely. So it obviously is something which is moving into food service equipment. So there would be areas that are obviously, I mean, certainly in terms of the machinery standards that I'm dealing with, we're rather waiting for standards to be written on these areas. So despite what the legislation is going to say on these subjects, it is it's going to come down to B standards, I suspect, which will actually deal with these issues, and hopefully that will address the points. Okay, other areas where there are new clauses. One of the areas which has been changed is to allow software-only instructions. There's been a presumption over the years that the instructions are have to be in paper, but increasingly with more complex machines, they're delivered as a PDF file or downloadable from the company's website, etc. And that is going to be allowed. But if a customer asks for paper, then the manufacturer has got to provide it free of charge, is the current wording. Now, in a similar sort of vein, in the 1.7s, there is a preference for pictograms to be used for controls. But if they're written signs, they should be in an official language of the country where the machine goes to. And that's been crossed out, that's been removed. And only pictograms would appear to be the way that the legislation is going to be phrased in the future. Machines got to be designed so you can clean, sufficient access for cleaning, which is definitely a good one for the food industry, I think. There are likely to be some changes in the old Annex 4 machines, but otherwise, in terms of the timing of the machinery regulation, how long it's going to take, I don't know, Keith, do you have any new information about what the timing is going to be on it?
No, we don't, Martin. And I think the complexity of the other areas that come into what was traditionally the Machinery Directive, I think the Commission are finding the challenges, and certainly the work we're doing with Orgalim in Brussels. And for those that don't know, Orgalim is the voice of European electrical and mechanical engineering industries, and is the representative voice there. There are significant challenges that are going in from Orgalim in terms of the proposal in the regulation, because as you mentioned earlier, it's in areas that are developing and are not mature, and it's a fast developing framework that the regulation is trying to manage, for want of a better term. Yes,
I mean, and as I say, certainly the way it's worded at the moment, it looks like it's at an early stage. It's not clear what you've got to do, certainly to me anyway, but maybe that will be, so it's not going to happen next year, is what you're saying, I think. Okay, so question is, when it finally comes, which may be a couple of years' time, maybe 2, maybe 3, then there'll be a transition period. And the $64,000 question is, what will the UK government do? Will it just adopt it? Or in which case we've got no problem, because the UK regulation is exactly a mirror of the European one. But it's quite possible that the UK government will, no, we don't want to do this. We want to do something different, or they're too busy worrying about other things, and it just slips by. So the new EU directive is implemented, but we still have the old UK legislation. I don't think either is necessarily, if that does happen, I don't think it's a complete disaster, because there are very few machines, I think, where the new clauses, by the sound of it, are going to affect you. And my personal feeling is that if we go back to look at these three areas, these are areas which I think the UK government will be wanting to write clauses about, because they are new areas. Okay, we have a slightly differently worded clause about those three areas. I don't think that will have a material impact on most machines, but we've got to wait and see, haven't we? And really the question is, who knows what government is going to be in place at the time. Okay, so I've come to the end of my presentation, but I'm sure there's going to be some questions. Jocelyn, how do you want to handle the question situation?
I don't know if Jocelyn can hear us. Well, Martin, if I can pick up on one that's come in.
Yeah, right, okay, fine, thank you.
Question regarding the standards, to ask if the UK standards are being recognised in the same way in the EU, and then asking, and is there a minimum standard requirement? And I guess the answer is that the EU will not be recognising and doesn't need to recognise UK standards. It has its own European harmonised standards.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yes, I'm not aware, certainly in your area, I'm not aware of any standards which are being recognised. But it would be the same if France decided to write a standard on its own. I doubt very much whether the UK would recognise it. If it was done at a European level, we would do.
Yeah.
I mean, I think on the standards front, I mean, one of the things I forgot to mention is that although SEN is basically an EU organisation, there was a question after Brexit about the status of the UK, whether we'd be allowed to carry on as a full member of SEN. And it has now been agreed that the UK is allowed to continue as a full member of SEN. And I think a lot of that has been because we have, let's face it, we make sure the English is right, don't we? So we're quite useful from that point of view. But also, I think the British standards people have carried on working following Brexit and are strong contributors in many areas. So, and I think there is a recognition of that. So, from that point of view, I mean, even again, if the legislation is slightly different, it's going to come back to what a standard says. Because of the English language, all of these standards are written in English to start with. The UK has an enormous amount of influence, actually, in terms of the shape of a standard and what it ultimately looks like. And we've not lost that, would be my comment.
Yeah, and if I may, just to pick up on that, the whole issue of regulatory alignment between the UK and the EU is a critical factor. And members are probably aware, we're very active within a UK group called URIS, which is 15 engineering trade associations looking to ensure regulatory alignment between UK designated standards and the EU. And so mirroring the work that's going on in the EU within the UK, because this is the principle of one product being available to go on as many markets as possible in an unhindered manner. It is critically what manufacturers want. We don't want friction there. So the work is going on in the UK on that front, and similar work is going on through FSEM, and that's the European Federation of Catering Equipment Manufacturers, where we have that liaison point with Orgalim in Brussels to be able to ensure we've got a finger on the pulse of what's going on there, to then be able to feed back to the UK government. Because what's been lost in the whole process is the communication between the EU government and the Commission and the UK government, certainly at a granular level in individual product sectors, and that's where we add value. So our workload is increased, well, it literally doubled, because we're having to do the same work in Brussels as to that we're doing in Westminster. But we are working actively to ensure that's the case. And we do have regular meetings with ministers on this, where there are issues. One thing I will say in terms of regulatory diversion, it's tending to come through on the environmental issues. And we've already seen some work going on with the potential for a water label in the UK. And there are other areas of activity where UK government is looking for there to be a competitive advantage for the UK, which could start working against that principle, but we're keeping a very close eye on that. Just as I've covered that, Martin, another question's come in terms of declarations of conformity.
Yeah.
And is it a mandatory requirement for there to be a separate declaration of conformity for CE and a separate one for UKCA?
Yes, I think so. You've got to bear in mind they're a legal document. And you're saying two different things to different organizations, as it were. So one is declaring conformity to the directives, the other is declaring conformity to the UK regulations. Yeah. So really, I think you've got to have two separate documents.
Okay, thank you, Martin. And just before we wrap up, because you asked if you wouldn't mind just going back, Martin, on the salient points on the requirements for UK importers.
Right, okay.
And we have a lot of product that's imported to sometimes supplement UK manufactured product or as standalone imported product. And if you wouldn't mind just giving us perhaps a quick recap on that, we'd be very grateful.
Okay. So this whole section. This whole section is about people supplying in Great Britain. So they could be UK manufacturers, they could be importers. So technically, it's the same product that you were making before, you can carry on selling. The changes are basically about the badges on it. So we've had CE up to now, you've now got to have UKCA for Great Britain. You don't have to have a UKCA for Northern Ireland. That change has got to happen before the 31st of December. After that, they should be all UKCA. So in terms of your products, the recommendation is that you have on the same product, which is technically the same as it was, a new plate which has got CE and UKCA. That wouldn't mean anything if it was sold in Europe, but it does mean something if it's sold in the UK. But it is also permissible for you to have a separate UKCA mark attached, but attached in the same way as the plate. Sub-assemblies, you don't need to have the UKCA mark on. So that is not necessary. So provided that on the main plate for the equipment, you've got the UKCA mark, then you can have contactors which have got CE marks, electric motors which have got CE marks. That is acceptable. In terms of existing stock, I think it's got to be in the UK basically before the 31st of December CE. After that date, if it's not in the UK, then I think it's not going to be complying to this particular requirement. Declaration of conformity, as I already said, in my view, I think it's got to be a separate document. And you know, in terms of your instructions, it becomes an extra page, of course, or whatever it is, but they are two separate things. So the UK declaration, you're declaring conformity to the UK legislation, UK regulations. You've got to put that BS on front of the ENs. And you've got to have this UK address where you will get the technical file from, as opposed to the EU Declaration of Conformity, where it would be directives. You don't have the BS, and the address where the technical file has got to come from has got to be in the EU. So they are two different things, and they are, you know, legal document. They can both be signed by the manufacturer. So the manufacturer could be in Germany on a UK Declaration of Conformity. The whole thing is signed by them, but you need to have this UK address of where the technical file would come from. So these are the parallels. This is the legislation you need to refer to on your UK Declaration of Conformity. And then this is just an example. So declaring conformity to those 3 UK regulations, listing the standards, BS in front of the ENs all the way through, a UK address, and it can, as I say, be signed by somebody in Germany or Italy or France, but there must be that UK address. The reason for this is because HSE training standards officers have lost the ability to bring a prosecution on, say, a German, a French, Italian company, which they had up until Brexit. Now that in practical terms means that you could carry on, say you don't have a UK address, you don't do, you could carry on and just supply machines, equipment to your customers in the UK, just from Germany, let's say. But what would happen if there was a problem with that product would be that your UK customer, your GB customer, could be considered to be the importer in that case and could be prosecuted if there was a problem with the product. And I'm sure your GB customer would not be happy about that situation. Okay, so again, exporters to the UK, you need to make sure that you have, if you don't already have, a UK office, a UK agent, a UK distributor, then you need to have one. In some cases, what's being done is to have an address and the other way around as well for UK companies exporting to the EU. So there may be a simple way around it. Don't know, are there any firms that offer that as a service that you're aware of, Keith, who are not agents?
Yes, there are companies that provide that service, yes.
Okay, yeah, I gather it's quite expensive, but if you don't do your own thing, as it were.
Yeah.
Okay, does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that does, and thank you very much for that recap, Martin. And thank you for the clarity of the presentation and also if we're going to get that across in a concise manner. I think the key thing for us, we know there's product that comes into the UK market directly into distributors and then passed on to customers. It's that move of the liabilities to the end user customer, and certainly something we've made clear in previous press releases, and it's probably timely to put something out into the industry to make that clear, because of the way in which companies tend to be used to products moving around and perhaps end user customers not understanding their liabilities of doing that in a post-Brexit Britain. It just leaves me for a few minutes. If anybody wants to open the mic and address a question directly to Martin, I'll just allow a pause now if anybody wishes to do that. No, you've answered all their questions, Martin, so thank you very much for that. It just leaves me to close the meeting and thank you all very much for attending. If you do have any questions, please do put them into any of the Secretariat team members and we'll get them across to Martin for him to come back with an answer for you. We also have very strong links with BAYS, and if you have questions that are relating to the changes, please again put those in together with any problems that you're experiencing in the whole process. It's very important that we keep the lines open to government to ensure they're aware of the challenges that all of this are bringing to you as members of the FEA and to our industry. So it leaves me just to thank Martin very much for his time in putting the presentation together this morning and for communicating that so clearly and effectively. Thanks to Jocelyn for putting the meeting together. I wish you all well and thank you very much for attending this morning. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.